Next, we're going to create a 3-tier application. We will do a separate video for each of those. And on this one, we will create the storage persistent engine that we will use. We will also write an HTTP server to interact with the data. And ultimately, we will write a client that will connect to the server that in turn will interact with the data store. So let's go ahead and move to our work area. And let's go ahead and bring in a repository that we will use in order to do our exercise. Here is the repository. You can see the address, and I'm going to go ahead and copy that to my clipboard. I will then go ahead and move to my file system, and I will clone that repository. And as you can see, that showed up here in a file system. It's called LittleDB, although eventually it'll hold all of the different tiers of this exercise. Now, before I continue, I need to cover the documentation for the little data store that we're going to use, and that is an npm package called LowDB. I'm going to go ahead and select the link. And as you can see here, this is the page within npm that describes the package. It describes how active it is. As you can see here, it is pretty widely used, over 1 million downloads a week. And it gives us some information as to its usage and how to install it. If we scroll down the list here, you can see that you install it by simply entering npm install lowdb. The first 4 lines here is how you reference the module and how do you specify the file that is going to persist the information. This is very much like a big database in the sense that it holds all of the data. It gives you some API to manage it. And if you power down your server, your data will be persisted. Now, as opposed to the big giant data servers, this is a very small, very lightweight, minimal database that we can use to illustrate how to interact with the data store. And also gives you here some information as to how we initialize the database, the defaults, how do we add a post, and so on. So we'll come back to this as we get into the application. For now, let's leave it aside and let's move into our work area. I'm going to go ahead and move in here to LittleDB. And you can see there that there are a number of files. For now, for the data store portion, we're simply going to be working with simple JS. And I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop. Well, let me show it to you in a little bit bigger space before I put it into the tab. And as you can see there, these are the 4 lines that address a file in your file system. In this case, I've chosen to call it db.json. And the very first thing that we're going to do is that we're going to initialize the data store. And that is precisely the line that I showed you before. So I'm simply going to copy and paste that line here. I'm going to write it all in one line. And I'm not going to use user. I'm simply going to create a property that has an array of posts, and inside a post I will write some additional objects, but we'll come back to that in a minute. Now we will come to the part where we add a post, and so I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to copy and paste onto the file here, and as you can see here, I have a couple of properties. This is writing to the posts, to the post property, and to the array we're going to push the following object: an ID, a title, and I also want to give it the property of published so that I can tell if something's been published or not. And I will enter the string of false in this case. Now you can see there that at the end of that, there's an instruction to write. And for now, this is all that we will do. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And I'm going to move it into the tab here so that we can have some more space. And now I will go ahead and run that file. npm, well, first I need to move into little db. And now I'm going to run node and simple.js. When I hit that, as you will see, I get here an error because I cannot find the module of LowDB. And the reason for that is because we have not yet installed it. If you remember that line within the documentation, it called for npm install LowDB. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And now I'm going to go ahead and run that file again. And as you can see there, we have a new file called db.json. That call ran in its entirety, and if we did the right thing, we should have some entries. And as you can see, we do. We have a property called posts, which has an array of objects, and in this case, we've written a single object to our little data store. And so in order to do some more, I'm simply going to copy this block here a couple more times. And here's where you have to start being a little bit careful, because these IDs could overlap and you could have more than one ID. And of course, if an ID is repeated for different information, it's not really an ID. And so I will simply number these sequentially. After the first one, I will write here good, on this one cool, and on this one great, and I will change this one to true. Well, let's do a couple of them just so we can have some variability. Okay, so I'm now going to go ahead and run this code again. I've saved the file. And now if we take a look at our data store, you will see that we have several more entries. Now, if you look at the documentation, you can see there how to read it back, how to filter, how to update, and I will leave that functionality to you to verify.